Here's William Lane Craig to engage in some hermeneutical contortionism to explain a passage in the Bible that is clearly hard to reconcile with modern theology.
Genesis says that God created man in his image, male and female, he created them. And it is hotly disputed among biblical commentators as to exactly what the image of God means.
Well, most theologians seem very reluctant to infer that it means what it literally says. Usually saying that something is made in the image of something else means that such a thing is made to physically resemble the other thing. Apologists and theologians who are committed to the idea of God as being some ethereal, immaterial entity, especially Craig, who believes that God is a timeless, spaceless, disembodied mind, don't like the idea that he has a physical resemblance to anything.
I don't have a firm and fast opinion on that matter because I think ultimately it doesn't matter how you interpret it. The reason I say that is that some people think that the image of God is a structural property of human beings. For example, that we are persons, that we are self-conscious, moral agents endowed with free will, and in that sense are like God.
When you look at the first passage where this statement appears, it says, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." Notice that it says both image and likeness. If it only said likeness, then it could sensibly be interpreted as comparing some intangible attributes, like humans and God are all persons or something like that. However, the fact that it says both image and likeness looks like it is intended to be read as not merely comparing abstract qualities like personhood or moral agency, but more specifically as a comparison of appearance in particular.
Others say, no, the image of God is a functional image. Namely, God has placed us here on this planet as his representatives and delegates to rule in his name over the earth. We are representations of his sovereignty and his kingdom here on this planet, so the image of God is functional.
I think this interpretation is inferred from the fact that the next part of the passage says, "And let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth." The functional interpretation seems to take this to be an explanation of how humans share God's likeness. This, however, doesn't explain why image was specified in addition to likeness. I think the theologians may be thinking of God differently from how the folks who wrote Genesis thought about him. Instead of thinking of him as some immaterial spiritual entity, maybe the author of Genesis, when picturing God, thought of him as looking like he's just a guy. Maybe they thought of him as having a head, a torso, 2 arms, and 2 legs. That would be consistent with passages that say things like, God was walking in the garden in the cool of the day. What would it mean for him to be walking in the garden if he's a timeless, spaceless, ethereal entity who doesn't have legs? If this is metaphorical, what could the metaphor possibly represent?
Others will say, no, it's relational. The image of God means that we, of all creatures, have the ability to have a relationship with God. And it's in that relationship that the image of God consists. The reason I say this doesn't matter, I think, ultimately in the end, which one you choose, is that they all imply the same thing in the end. Namely, in order to stand in a relationship with God, in order to function as his representative on this earth, you have to have certain structural properties like self-consciousness, freedom of the will, moral agency, and so forth. So that the grounding for these functions and relations consists in these properties which we share with God.
And sharing those properties could reasonably fall under the category of likeness, but none of them go beyond abstract likeness to anything comparable to an image. And the Bible says that we share both likeness and image with God. All these interpretations that Craig listed treat this passage as though its author was just being redundant. That's a weird way to look at the author of Genesis if you assume him to be infallible.
So whether those properties just are God's image in us, or whether they are the basis and ground of the image, which is the function and relation, I think can remain an open question. The point is that however you interpret the image of God, it entails that we are personal, self-conscious, moral agents just like God.
Again, those could fall under the category of likeness, but when the Bible says image in addition to likeness, it seems to be saying something more specific. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.